Hello again, beautiful beings of light. I am so freaking excited to introduce someone to you today. And so far you have met my dad and you've met my wife, and this is another incredibly special soul that I have in my life. Definitely one of my longest running friends. I mean, if I were to say I had a best friend, this would be it. Not only is she my best friend, but she is incredibly divinely connected, very spiritual, and has a very rooted educational background. And basically, she calls herself a soul wound healer. And ultimately, how I view her is she is really freaking good at getting you out of the 3D and getting you into the 5D. So she knows all the language and the verbiage to kind of get you into that transitional period and really just allow you to ascend to a higher vibration. And she's incredible. So her name is Charlotte Shipley. Thank you so much, Charlotte, for being on the show today. And yeah, thanks for being here.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Let's talk a little bit more about your background. I mean, you are still so young, but you lived such a full life already. So give people a little overview and background about where you've come from at a personal level, and then also your education to kind of get you to where you are right here, right now.
For sure. So hello, everybody. My name's Charlotte, as you know, Elizabeth April was saying. I really just want to thank you, Elizabeth, for having me on your show, and thank you to all of your amazing followers and viewers for opening up their hearts and being with us today. I think it's going to be a pretty special video and journey. So my journey obviously started in this lifetime as a young person who was born with a pretty severe physical disability. So I was born in this lifetime still with some injuries from previous lifetimes. That included being born without a hip and some muscles on the right side of my body. And being different really challenged my view of the world and really challenged my ego. I'm an Aries, I'm kind of fiery, so it has been a journey to be in a body that doesn't necessarily allow for fast-paced things, that is always challenging my patience and my ego. I also am queer and have had a big sort of journey in myself in figuring that out, and then also really called in this lifetime to work with other queer folks and other people really struggling with their identity. So that is a bit about who I am in terms of my identifiers. I took this experience and decided I was going to, at a fairly young age, pursue social work and pursue mental health work, working with folks who are struggling. And as I progressed in my experiences working with people going through mental health challenges, really struggling with lessons in this life, I always knew that there was teaching and learning to be done. But it wasn't until I really met Elizabeth April where I was able to see how interconnected my own experiences, my education, and also my spiritual teachings all were. So they all sort of wove together really nicely. And that basically brought me to where I am now, which is I got my master's in social work. I started in 2018. In doing that, again, just really honing some more skills, some more sort of confidence, going through a lot of ego deaths, and really working through my purpose and calling in this life, which is why we're here and what we're kind of talking about.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the world, and with so many people, like you mentioned, just kind of shifting and figuring out their true selves and going through so many different symptoms and their own ego deaths. Like, what do you feel right now is happening with people at an individual level within their ascension and awakening, and maybe mentioning a little bit about depression and anxiety and some mental health stuff that people are experiencing right now upon their awakening?
Good question. So right now, especially as we know, there's a massive shift happening. And in my social work practice, so I work as a clinical social worker. So when I wear that hat, I have to sort of change some of the lingo of what I'm talking about. But truly, it's all universal. We're all shifting and we are all going within and asking ourselves, what is my purpose? What is my calling? Everyone that I'm talking to lately is really having these existential sort of moments with themselves of, do I want to be at this 9 to 5 forever? Do I want to be in this relationship forever? Do I, who am I? Do I even know myself? Of course, when we ask ourselves those questions, unless you're like, next level enlightened, that will provoke a lot of anxiety and sometimes depression. And I really truly believe that, this quarantine period has offered us literally, the opportunity to go in. We couldn't go out, and so we had no choice but to go in. And that is, I think, a really beautiful thing if we let it be what it is and really embrace the process. Although I do know the process is messy, the process can be painful, the process can be confusing, but with support and with really anchoring yourself in your human and your own self-love and worth, you can get through it and you can ascend, you can shift into 5D.
Absolutely. Yeah. Could not have said that better myself. So I love it. And something that just kind of came to mind that I think would be really interesting for you to relay to people is some of the cases, obviously confidentiality, not naming names, but some of the things that you had to deal with in your last clinical emergency. I'm not sure what the name is of what you did in the emergency room. Maybe you can explain that job. And then I was thinking, explain maybe one example of some of the craziest, even though I don't believe in crazy, cases that you experienced, and then maybe some of the, kind of more just normal everyday people coming in to see you. So I think that would be very interesting for people to kind of get that background from you as well.
Absolutely. So I recently worked at a hospital in a very major city in their emergency department, but in the psychiatric emergency. So this is where first responders would bring folks who were experiencing a mental health crisis, or folks would bring themselves if they felt that they were at risk or they needed help. Just like schools, hospitals tend to be sort of this idea of safety and salvation people get in their minds when they're, either really in a dark place, if they are, really just in a different dimension, and they're not acting in like a human way, and people get alarmed by that and confused, and then they'll reach out. So I feel like it was a really interesting balance for me to strike in terms of, again, it's not my place to, tell everybody the truth. In that role. And so I had to really tap into my intuition and figure out, who's open for this information and who's not. So some of the folks, I'll tell you an example. On one of my last days there, I was, feeling a bit nostalgic. I'd made, the decision, and kind of the universe made the decision for me, as well as it often does, that it was time for me to be done there. And so it was one of my last days, kind of feeling, we all go through it of like, what's next? What's going on? Why did the universe sort of shut this door for me? What's the next door that's going to be open? I was kind of in my own world. I had a client come in who was experiencing psychosis. So he was, so my role would be to do an assessment of like, what exactly does this look like? What is this person experiencing? And how imminent do they need help? And what does that help look like? Was my job. So I went in to chat with him, and he's very spiritual. He named that right off the bat because that was all part of my assessment. He starts telling me that he has been hearing voices and seeing dark entities, and that this has essentially affected him so deeply that he lost his job, His family had stopped talking to him. He was really enmeshed with these dark entities and really took it on as his part of his identity and felt really helpless. So as he was talking, because he was spiritual and just because, I don't know, sometimes the spirit just like moves through you. I know you know this, that I was like, I actually just need to tell you something. And he was sort of taken back and said, what? And I said, you know, you can stop that, right? And he had no idea. He had never even conceptualized the fact that he could close that portal. And so I said, let's just try. Let's take a moment. Let's close our eyes. And I want you to close your eyes, picture, you know, the energetic hole that is there in your aura where, you know, spirits are coming in. And I want you to like visualize it closing. And whatever feels right, whether to say out loud, whether to like draw, you know, the hole with your hand and then push it shut, whatever kind of you feel you need to do, I want you to do it to close that portal right now. So we sat together. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. He said, I'm going to picture it. And then I'm going to picture myself pushing the door closed. I said, great. And then I want you to also say, like, I am only open for information when. And so we had that little conversation of when he's also able to open that door, but he needs to give a signal and sign to spirit that he's open. So in that moment, he closed the portal. And this is someone who had been hearing nonstop voices for years at this point. And he was also homeless. Like I said, had very little connection to anybody, right? Or support. So closed his eyes, shut the portal. And when he opened his eyes, he was crying. And I said, are you okay? I was kind of nervous. Like, had I upset him? And he said, like, he was just had so much gratitude for this information because this was the first time in years that he could control it, that he was in his own body with his own thoughts and his own mind. And he was like, can I hug you? And of course, this is Corona. So I was like, I really wish, let's do like a, like, you know, light energy hug or whatever. So that moment, I don't think that will ever leave me, that example. And I mean, like, there's so much backstory of how those things happened. It wasn't magic. It felt like magic, but he had planted the seeds and he had manifested it. And in that moment, the universe said, okay, you're ready. And here you go. And so we needed to see each other. Had he got those things before, he wouldn't have received that information he so desperately needed.
Wow. And I think that those are the moments that also taught you that this is what you're here to do. This is what you're good at.
Totally.
You know,
Totally.
You are so good at understanding from a psychological perspective, from an educated perspective, what this person is going through, but then kind of intermeshing the spiritual as well. And I think with your own practice, you don't have to hold back and just kind of confine yourself to the rules and regulations of the hospital, which is incredible. I have another question for you as well that just kind of popped up, which is, a lot of people who came into that job, you know, into the emergency psych ward, who came to see you for the assessment, you know, they were all like, a lot of them were talking to aliens and saying that they were getting abducted. And, you know, some of the things that you would relate to me, you know, I felt like that those are my people, you know, like that's an everyday experience for me. So I want to ask you, just out of like curiosity, what separates those individuals who are having, say, the same sort of experiences that I have on a day-to-day basis, and someone like me who's also having the same experiences? Why are they at the emergency section of a psych ward, you know, as opposed to me living my life and really kind of standing in my power with that? Like, just from your perspective, what do you think the difference is there?
You know, there's not much of a difference. And I would say the one word that came to me is insight. So this is, again, how we really in the mental health world judge if somebody is well or unwell, right? And again, I always am like, basically everything I said can be air quoted, right? Like, that's all also up for interpretation, what well and unwell would look like. But medically speaking, if your symptoms, if your experiences are so negatively intrusive in your life that you're unable to cope day to day, that is where I would say it's important to seek help, and it's important to seek support. You know, an example would be, again, one of the screening questions for psychosis is, do you hear or see things other people can't? One of the major, most important things to remember as a mental health professional, and then also as just like a person, as a human, is that, you know, the way we word that is problematic, right? Because so I would always add at the end, okay, so do you feel like you can hear or see things other people can't, and does that bother you?
Right.
So how intrusive is it? And it's a similar marker for addiction too, right? So like, you know, if someone was like, okay, so like I smoke weed every day, and for one person that could really be a problem because maybe they're not going to work, maybe they're not, you know, like moving their body, maybe they're just numbing out or zoning out, right? But for somebody else, that could be like exponentially helpful for them as well. So it's really about context. And so does that bother you? So that's the other piece. How intrusive is it? And then the other piece is, how insightful are you, right? So you know that not everybody can hear or see these things, and that this is something that's sort of a special gift to you that you've honed and that you kind of welcome and embrace. Whereas, you know, I have seen folks who truly believe in their core that they are in a video game.
I love it.
Right? And so that, okay, like, I mean, you and I could talk forever about just that in general. But I mean, the thing with that is he was really just stressed about it. He didn't want to be there. Yeah. He missed his family. He missed normalcy, right? Yeah. And so that is when it's like, that is time for intervention. It's just interesting place. Even myself as a mental health professional, I sort of feel like this is a bit of my coming out video around who I am as a spiritual being, as well as a mental health professional.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just interesting how you're so good at kind of sticking that key in for someone who does feel like they're out of control, or they have the loss of control with their beliefs and understanding in their day-to-day, and just kind of either validating what they're experiencing. Because if you're experiencing, you know, voices and images on a day-to-day basis, and everyone you go see tells you, oh, you're crazy, oh, you're crazy, oh, you're crazy, and then you go see someone and says, oh, okay, yeah, I've had that too. But you know, if it's intruding your life, it's not benefiting, right? Totally. And it's all just a balance. So I know for me, when I was a child, it was very difficult for me to kind of fit in or get along or feel right in myself, only because of where the rest of society was at, not because of my own experiences. I was great in my own experiences, but when I relayed those experiences to anyone, you know, that's when there was an issue, and that's when I felt like an outcast, right? So yeah, you're just so good at the balance between those two worlds.
What's interesting, I just want to interrupt for 1 second, is what I was going to say is that I actually can relate to that, having a disability. When I tell my like fulsome story, I always talk about how disability is a social construct. And I had no idea I was disabled until I entered an institution, and that institution was school. And so similarly to you, it's like, you're like, what's the big deal, guys? Like, I'm having a great time in my head. Like, this is awesome. I think people are becoming more aware of how constricting and how oppressive all of these societal sort of norms, and, you know, we live in a society that's constructed for like one type of a person and one type of a way of knowing, and, you know, that's really very like obsessed with science and like, you know, logic, and that's really important. But again, as we know, everything in balance.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I know that you, like you just mentioned, you're kind of spiritually coming out of the closet, and I've definitely been a huge push into getting you there, because you are not just a social worker. You're not just a counselor. You're not just, rooted in that. You are so much more. You have such a gift to give. And you've given me so many gifts in our friendship as well. And helping me kind of normalize and stabilize and navigate. And even with clients who have issues that I can't deal with, you're right there with all of the right solutions and perspectives and even the whole BLM movement. Like, you were really good at helping me understand why this movement is happening. Even though you're not personally affected, you're really good at just kind of understanding these greater social constructs and the marginalization that everyone feels, no matter what those labels or minorities are, right? So you're just so good at that. So give people a little overview of what a one-on-one session would look like for you, whether it be 30 minutes, 60 minutes, because there's a lot of clients that I'm no longer taking on. And I think that even though you're not a full psychic, you're extremely intuitive and you have a lot of gifts to give, especially with the navigation between 3D, 4D, and 5D right now. So so what does that one-on-one session look like?
Well, thank you for saying all those nice things. I think it's, again, I want to be really clear that these sessions are not counseling, it's not therapy, and it's not social work. So I think that that's really important to get across. Maybe I shouldn't say it is not those things, but it's also not those things, which is great and confusing. But basically, it's a hybridization of social work, my mental health knowledge and understanding of the human experience, right? From my own experience being marginalized as someone with a disability, someone who's queer. I mean, the list goes on in terms of like, I think my understanding and my studies around oppression and marginalization and my commitment to social justice. So really marrying that with my spiritual self and spiritual sense of knowing and my own intuition, they come together to create me as the soul wound teacher and healer. And then the third component that's really important in session is the client. So what I'm asking of clients when they come for a 1 hour session with me is to set an intention, to bring another, like human word for that would be goal, right? So bring something that you would like to work on, work through, unpack, or understand. Some things that you could bring in terms of an intention are, like, what are some harmful narratives I've internalized from being a human? How do I unpack these? Mm-hmm. You could ask yourself, do I need to process an experience that I've had in this lifetime or a previous lifetime? And you need to process it with somebody who's going to understand and really meet you where you're at and offer a bit of their own sort of intuitive guidance as well. Maybe you are in a cycle that is coming to an end or that you keep repeating and you're looking for some information to help you break out of that cycle. Maybe, you're feeling like you can step into 5D for a bit and then you keep falling back into 3D. And what does that feel like? And how do you navigate those two, vibrations and what does that feel like in your body when you're in 5D versus 3D, and what's important and what can we honor about 3D that helps us even understand and appreciate 5D more. So, is there a soul wound that you have that, you're really looking for some healing energy or a healing sort of ritual that you can work through, cutting a cord and ultimately connecting with yourself more deeply and connecting to yourself as a human, to yourself as a spiritual being, and then connecting to the global consciousness is really sort of like where we can go with this. So we're going to get curious together. We're going to ask questions about it. We're going to use our own intuition. I have a plethora of, cards we could pull, and then really just digging through my mental health, social work toolbox as well. And then through the collaboration process, we're going to create what I call a healing plan. From that plan, we're going to talk about how do we solve, how do we move through, how do we understand whatever it is that you brought to session. And we're going to kind of break it into very doable chunks of what you can do walking away from the session. Doing something, a practice every day to shift some of those neural pathways, right? Or maybe stopping doing something. Or maybe just, you talk about this all the time, and I was like smiling so big when I heard you talk about this because I say this every single day, multiple times a day, about intention, and how going for a walk, to just go for a walk, is totally different than setting the intention to connect with spirit on a walk, or setting the intention to let your thoughts, you know, to help nature co-regulate you. I think with all of that information, all of the stuff that we combine, we're going to create a plan and really hopefully set you up for success in terms of your shift, managing some of those symptoms that come up and that happen. And really, you know, it's not like a solid plan that's going to come to an end. You can always come back. We can rework the plan. We can move forward and hopefully just set you up for skills that will help you really navigate this kind of turbulent, shifty time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I always say that, you know, whenever I interact with your energy, and even if we're just like hanging out as friends and like having a good time, it always feels like you're wrapping me in this warm pink blanket. Like you have so much mama bear, protective, supportive, loving, like unconditional loving energy, you know, and I'm more of that divine masculine.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really just nice, even just being in your energy, which is awesome. So just tell people how they can find you, what your website is, or your email, or whatever. And then people can kind of just see if this resonates, and they can find you and connect with you, and set up, you know, a path and a journey to their own healing.
Totally. So people can go to my website, which is positivespaceconsulting.ca. And Positive Space Consulting is the business that encapsulates my sort of 3 strands of what I kind of touch on. So there's, for Ontario residents, there's the mental health counseling, and then spiritual consulting. And then I also do some LGBTQ advocacy work as well. So they can go to my website, they can book right on there. It's going to ask them, it'll prompt them to go directly to the spiritual consulting page if they're from outside of Ontario. Sessions will take place virtually, so they can book. They'll be over Zoom, and folks can book, you know, a single session. They can book a repeat session. I'm going to be looking at adding some packages on there, and I accept all major credit cards as well as e-transfers that can be made to my email, which you'll find on my website, and also PayPal. One thing I did want to mention, I don't want to forget this before we go, is that one thing specifically that I want to highlight that I think is also really important right now that people are going through is identity, and really tapping into like, who am I? Specifically shedding layers of shame around if you are part of the LGBTQ community, and anyone who sort of is like an outlier or an outsider. So that's a really big niche for me as well. So if you're kind of curious about, you know, your physical body or your own, you know, like just identity, that's sort of a big part of what I do, and what I think is really important as well, because that authenticity is going to help you shift into 5D a lot quicker.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much, Charlotte. It's so nice to introduce you to all my people. And I really hope that if you are struggling, if you do feel like you're repeating the same cycles over and over again, reach out to her, because she is an incredible support system. I'm a starseed. I'm a little alien. I've never felt like I fit in and belonged. And she's been the biggest support and one of my best friends for many, many years now. So I just want all of you to experience her good vibes and knowledge and experience. So thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, and I will see you very soon.
Thank
Bye
you.
for now.
Bye.